Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today we're going to talk about plants that used to be expensive that are now inexpensive. Now, prices on the plant market are constantly fluctuating, but it really does seem like more often than not that many plants are only skyrocketing in price at the moment. But there are a bunch of plants that actually fall on the opposite end of that spectrum, which are plants that used to be pricey and hard to find, which are now affordable and accessible. So we're going to spotlight a couple of those today. And the first one I want to talk about today is the ever so lovely Calathea MUSAICA. This is a rather popular Calathea at the moment, and it's actually quite funny that this is a popular Calathea because I think this is probably one of the most least showy Calatheas. If you're familiar with prayer plants or Calatheas or any type of prayer plant or Marantaceae, that they are very showy in their foliage and they have a lot of colors and they really do show off what they have to offer. Now, Calathea MUSAICA is a little bit more muted in its beauty and it's much more appreciated for its mosaic-like patterns on the leaves. Yet it's still just a plain green plant, but that's actually what I really like about this Calathea. And it being a less showy, has less colors, and is just more green, it has much more chlorophyll. It seems to be a much easier Calathea or prayer plant in general to care for, as if you're familiar with prayer plants, they tend to be a little bit more finicky, as they are just needier plants, as they don't like tap water because they can't transpire out the things in the tap water like chlorine and stuff that will get stuck in the tips. As you can see, I have some brown tips on some of my leaves here because I'm still watering my plants with tap water because I am not too picky. But if you are someone who is, say, a type A personality and needs everything to look perfect and just be perfect, water your plants with distilled water because you do not want them to get some marks on them if you really do want to keep them looking perfect. But it's not something that's going to affect the health of the plant. It's only going to affect the appearance and the aesthetic and the appeal of the plant. So just something to bear in mind there. But as well as that, they really do prefer higher humidity. If you're not giving your prayer plants higher humidity, you're going to get brown edges. So troubleshooting your Calatheas, if you're getting brown tips on the tips of the leaves, you're probably using the wrong type of water. But if you're getting brown edges, you're probably not using enough or giving your plant enough humidity, and you might want to consider either getting a glass cloche to keep it inside like a terrarium setting, or getting a humidifier to up the humidity in the room. Spraying your plants is absolutely going to clean off the leaves and stuff. It's not really going to raise the humidity for more than a few seconds or a few minutes, so just something to bear in mind. If you're really struggling with the humidity, you're probably going to want to go with like a glass cloche option, or getting a humidifier, which I would recommend to plant owners specifically in the winter time when the heat kicks on and dries out the air in our homes. But this is a much easier Calathea to care for, as I mentioned, so I'm really happy that this one is a lot more inexpensive, because when I got my hands on this plant, it was quite a bit more money than it costs now for a lot less plant that you would get now. Now, there is one thing that all of these plants that we're going to talk about today share in common, and it's that they are being mass produced, which is not an issue because it's responsibly being done, but it's just something to bear in mind. It's going to kind of, it just makes it, it brings the plant hunt down a little bit when it becomes just super easy to find this plant when you just walk into any big box store, which, it's good that it makes it more accessible, but at the same time, I feel like it kind of dulls the excitement a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Anybody feeling me there? But I do really like the fact that plants like this are much more accessible and much easier to find, because I think that's really important in making plants for everybody. You know what I mean? Because plants are absolutely for everybody. Another one I want to talk about today is the ZZ Raven. So this plant, I feel like, was a real hot commodity just like maybe 2 years ago. The ZZ plants, whether it's a raven or a plain green ZZ plant, it is the one plant I recommend to people if they come to me in the plant shop where I work and they say, I'm looking for a plant that is going somewhere with no windows, or I have an office cubicle before COVID that needed a plant and they were nervous that it wasn't going to get enough light. It was always a ZZ plant's what I recommend. They have a bathroom with no windows, they have a lofted bedroom or something along those lines. A ZZ plant's what you want. Whether you want a little 4-inch pot to go on top of your table or a 10-inch floor plant to take up your living space. A ZZ plant's what you want if that's the setting that you have. And while these love low light, they also love small amounts of water. Mind you, they do absolutely need to be watered, but if you're familiar with ZZ plants, you might notice that they have these kind of like growths. They look kind of like potatoes that are growing inside the soil, and that's where they're storing all their water, as well as in these very thick and succulent stems and leaves. So this plant just doesn't require water very often. I always say about a ZZ plant, if you water it more than you pay your rent, it's too much. Well, you could totally be watering this plant probably every 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how much light you are giving it. If you are nervous you're going to be overwatering this plant, water it when you pay your rent. You could even wait till you notice that the stalks on some of these fronds start to shrivel or get a little puckered. Then you can go ahead and give your plant water and it'll plump back up and look good as new in just a day or two's time. But that's a surefire way to make sure that you're not overwatering your ZZ plant, as really the only way to kill this plant is to water it too much, as these tubers or the potato thingies and these stalks will begin to yellow and rot and become mush, and you will not be happy, specifically if it's a ZZ Raven, the black leaf ZZ, which is quite popular as it's very mysterious and spooky and really does look like somebody just kind of like spray painted or just like took a flamethrower to a ZZ plant and just completely torched it to a crisp. So it's quite showy for that manner. Now this plant, as I was saying, is quite popular, and a couple years ago really did go for a pretty penny. I'd say a plant this size, which is rather small, would probably still go for over $100, maybe like $75. But at this point, because it is being mass produced, I think that something this size is probably worth no more than like $15, given there are people out there who are probably going to still try to make a pretty penny off of this plant and will probably purchase a larger one and separate it into smaller pots and put it on the internet and then try to sell them for much more than they paid for it, which is to each their own. It's not a very responsible thing to do, but people are going to do it. So you're still probably going to find this plant selling for larger amounts of money. And as with really all of these on this list, because the plant trend and craze is a very hot thing right now, and you do need to keep in mind that there are some people who have bad intentions who might be trying to make money off of this trend. So just something to keep in mind. But ZZ Raven, a very popular plant, still quite popular, but fortunately it doesn't carry that price tag that it used to carry, and it's much more accessible, much more affordable, and that makes me happy. So another one we're going to talk about today is this lovely Swiss cheese plant. Now this is a Monstera adansonii, and this is a plant that I feel like when I first got into plants like 5 or 6 years ago, this is one that I would see online and it just like wasn't anywhere. And then when you would come across it in a store, which is very, very rare, it would cost a good amount of money. Now, this isn't one that carries the kind of price tag that like the ZZ Raven carried, where it was over $100. I think I would be surprised if at any point in my lifetime that if you were to walk into a houseplant store or any kind of nursery and they had this in stock, that it would be 3 digits in the size pot that I have here. That being said, this is a plant that's gone through kind of a wave where Monstera deliciosa, the classic Swiss cheese plant they call it, or sometimes they call it a split-leaf philodendron, although it's not a philodendron, that's a conversation for another day or a video. But this is one that suddenly became really popular as that plant was becoming really popular, because I guess people just wanted all of the Monsteras. They just want to collect all of the plants. So this one, for a really long time, was actually really hard to get your hands on. So it was quite common that you'd find like a hanging basket of it in the store for probably like $60 or $70. But at this point, I'm able to get weekly in the shop where I work little 4-inch pots that are full of this plant, and I think they sell in the store where I work for no more than $15 if I'm not mistaken. So much more affordable, and it's really nice to see this plant in a 4-inch pot, because that's something I didn't really expect to see for a long time, the way that it was being produced. This one probably doesn't fall as far in the category as like expensive, but this is wholeheartedly a plant that used to be super hard to find, used to carry a much higher price tag than it does now, and it's very nice that this is one that is much easier to find, as with all of these, because these are just such joyous plants to grow, and it's very important that everybody can be able to get their hands on these and grow them. There's another one I actually want to talk about really quickly before I pick up another one, because I don't have it with me today, but there's another plant that I've talked about in videos past that you might know I'm not really a big fan of, but it's called the Philodendron Birkin. And this is a plant that, oh my goodness, this thing I could go on about it, but it was kind of manufactured to be an expensive plant. They called it Birkin, for crying out loud, if you're familiar with a Birkin bag, which is a very expensive bag. They named this plant Philodendron Birkin, and they started selling it when it first dropped, let's say, for well over $100. Like this little 4-inch pots that you see now used to sell for well over $100. But as things happen, plants become mass produced if they gain a lot of popularity, as the Philodendron Birkin was gaining a lot of popularity, and suddenly this plant is available in every plant shop and it costs next to nothing. So once again, I think I sell 4-inch pots of really full 4-inch pots in the shop where I work for $15. So you can see how far things have come in such a short span of time. So that's something really to keep in mind too. With some of these plants that are really just like skyrocketing, it can only go so far before the balloon pops. So I wouldn't be surprised if next year I'm making another video about plants that used to be expensive that are now inexpensive, that includes things like Philodendron Pink Princess, which that plant, spoiler alert, will probably be in a video where we talk about plants that used to be inexpensive that are now expensive. But moving on, we're going to talk about this Rhaphidophora tetrasperma right here, or they sometimes call this the mini Monstera for its clearly looking like a Monstera appearance, although it's a completely different genus in its own. And you can see I have a trellis of it growing up behind me, but you can probably only see the bottom of the trellis here, which is starting to get really tired, but all of the foliage is up at the top there. And this is a plant like 2 years ago that was hot. Everybody wanted a Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, and it was nowhere to be found. It was even just like a little 4-inch pot selling for at least $50. And we've come a long way because this plant has been mass produced under a process which is called tissue culture, which I am not the right person to ask about tissue culture. You should look into someone else's channel about that. This is a plant that has been grown, mass-produced by tissue culture, and it has been very readily available. It's been popping up, I think, starting last year, where it's just been showing up everywhere for pennies compared to what it used to be worth, which is, once again, very nice. While it might be not super nice for the people who are trying to make money off of this plant, it's nice for the people who want to grow the plants in their home and are just trying to get fun plants and have them be accessible and affordable. So once again, very happy that this is a plant that has fallen into that category and not the opposite category of plants that are just getting more and more expensive. This is a plant in specific that you can start with a really small plant, like you can buy a small 4-inch pot that you can see at every plant store, as I've been noticing they all have, and it will grow up into like what I have here on the trellis, because this trellis is made by, I think, 2 small plants that I purchased in the past a couple years ago, and over the past couple years, or more so the last year since I've installed it on the trellis, it's really just taken to its new home and has really grown quite wild, as you can see. So this is a plant that you could either trade for somebody and just get a small piece, or purchase a small 4-inch pot at your local plant store, and that's all you need to really get a huge plant going. A really incredible plant. I'm really happy that this one is much more accessible now. And last but not least, we're going to talk about this dainty little plant right here. This is a Dieffenbachia Reflector. This is a kind of a similar thing where it's not as mass produced as these other plants, but this is a plant that is new to the market. So I remember I was at TPIE, which is the Tropical Plant International Expo. I believe I was there about 1.5 years ago in January 2019, and this was one of the plants that they were actually spotlighting as a new plant. So when plants are new, like the Philodendron Birkin, for example, it gets exciting and people want to grow a new plant, and sellers, or the people who go to TPIE, who are like sellers who work in the industry like I do, they want to buy this plant, and because it's so new and it's so beautiful, they want to sell it for top dollar. So when it was 2019 and Dieffenbachia Reflector was just first coming on the market, it wasn't uncommon to find people selling, 4 or 6 inch pots of this plant for much more than it's worth now. Now, keeping in mind, this wasn't a plant, once again, that was worth hundreds of dollars. This was still one that was probably only selling for maybe like upwards of like $75 for a full pot. This is one that you can walk into a big box store nowadays and find it for quite cheap, which, as I keep saying, is very nice. Of course, it's not good for the plant market in some senses, but I think it's better than things becoming worth their weight in gold at this point. So a really underrated houseplant. I don't hear too much anymore about Dieffenbachia Reflector. I just know that it's not as hot as it used to be, which is probably another reason why it's a little bit more inexpensive now. But this is definitely one that I've seen in big box stores, and I think it's been more commonly sold in big box stores than other stores. So a really wonderful plant that once was worth a lot more than it used to be. And it's just very nice that it costs a little bit less now. So I don't really have much to say about this one. I honestly have been growing it out in my courtyard, been reviving it, and I just cut it off very recently, and I'm growing it in this little glass jar. It hasn't even rooted yet, so once it roots up, I'll go ahead and pot it up in a nice pot and hopefully get it looking good. But you can see it's got this nice little white stripe down the center, which is why they call it Dieffenbachia Reflector, because it's supposed to look like it's reflecting sunlight. And it also gets a little bit of green splashing, but of course mine's a very underwhelming specimen. But that's nothing that a quick Google search can't answer any questions you have about this plant. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. It's a lot of fun talking about this kind of topic, and I'm excited to, in a future video, talk about the opposite, as I mentioned, which is plants that used to be inexpensive that are now expensive and quite inaccessible. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at PhillyFoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great time!